The time was 1943, when one of the most despised men of World War II stepped off a bus and stared at the killing center, infamously known as Auschwitz. This was the place where he would utilize his medical skills, not to help those sick and dying, but to torture them with every slice, every stitch, and every injection. This man, although never captured, was notorious for the disgusting medical torture of prisoners in Auschwitz and was hunted after the war ended. This man was Josef Mengele. On March 16, 1911, Josef Mengele was born to a small, loving Catholic family of 5 in Günzburg, Bavaria. As the eldest brother, he had to act as a role model for his younger brothers and bring pride to his father, the founder of the Carl Mengele & Sons company that produced farming machinery. Joseph thrived at academics and took strong interest in science, fascinated by how the human body operated. He earned his diploma at 19 and left his family to study philosophy and further his education at university in Munich. Joseph was a determined young man, excited about his future. Joseph worked earnestly towards medical school at the University of Bonn, planning to take the admission exam. But on his way to the University of Bonn every day, he would walk past the nearby Nazi headquarters. He was fascinated by the regime and the power they represented. His eyes would linger on their uniforms, weapons, and the stern looks on their faces as he strode forward toward the school. In 1931, 1 year after starting school in Munich, Joseph signed up for the Nazi paramilitary organization. Every second of every meeting interested him, specifically the topic of racial science. 4 years later, after earning his PhD, he began at the Institute for Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene in Frankfurt. He was given the job of research assistant for Ottmar Freiherr von Vaschur, a well-known German scientist known for studying the biology of twins. Mengele would work hours and hours studying the biology of the birth condition. When he finished his thesis and his research with Dr. von Vaschur, he earned his cum laude doctorate in medicine from the University of Frankfurt. But he wanted more hands-on experience. So, in 1937, Josef Mengele joined the Nazi Party. The training was intense, even for a light infantry troop, but Mengele was dedicated to his new life, and in June 1940, after being called to service for a short period, he was appointed second lieutenant for the medical service in the Waffen-SS. The next couple of years flew by for Mengele as he joined the 5th SS Panzer Division as a medical officer, where he rescued a German soldier from a tank ready to explode and was awarded Iron Cross Second in First Class, the Wound Badge in Black, and the Medal for the Care of the German People. But when Joseph was injured in battle, he was no longer able to serve or utilize his medical skills. He didn't know how he could utilize his skills any longer, until von Vaschur recommended he transfer to a concentration camp as a medical professional. Mengele applied for transfer immediately and was accepted. Joseph departed the bus and stared at the horror sight before him, ignorant to the pain and suffering and focusing instead on the anticipation he felt to take up his new post as the chief physician at Birkenau, a subcamp in the Auschwitz complex. His tasks, however, were foreign to him. He was not in charge of caring for his patients, but tasked with supervising the work of the inmate doctors, who were forced to work in the camp. But Mengele could not stick to his supervisory responsibilities. The more death around him he saw, the more he hungered to be a part of it. He oversaw the mass killings of Jewish individuals with Zyklon B, the cyanide-based pesticide that would instantly kill those trapped in gas chambers. When patients were in the medical facilities for longer than 2 weeks, he ordered them to be thrown in the gas chambers. An outbreak of Noma struck the Romani camp nearby, and hundreds were afflicted with gangrene and painful sores covering their bodies. Mengele, blind to the suffering, saw the outbreak as an opportunity for medical study. He forced one of the Jewish doctors in prison in the camp, Berthold Epstein, to help him gather up groups of people and bring them back to Auschwitz, where he could study the painful disease. He ordered the killing of groups of afflicted children to preserve their heads and organs for further study at the SS Medical Academy in Graz, and operated, without offering sedation, to other patients, studying them both internally and externally to gain as much knowledge as possible. But even as the outbreak was eradicated from the camp, the experimentation did not stop. In another block of the women's camp at Auschwitz, a typhoid epidemic broke out. Mengele was appalled at the disease and how quickly it was spreading, and ordered for the block of 600 women to be executed in the gas chambers. But it didn't stop there. Mengele cleared out the entire women's camp, every barrack, every cell, ignoring whether they had symptoms or not, simply to move in quarantine women from another block. His methods were repeated when scarlet fever and other infections broke out. He killed without asking questions, looking only to eradicate any signs of sickness to embrace the feeling of power and assert his dominance in the camp. He was feared, and Josef Mengele enjoyed it. The leaders at the camp were pleased with his actions and awarded him the War Merit Cross shortly before promoting him to first physician. He took advantage of the new opportunity to use his medical skills as torture tactics. He strolled along the camp, deviously smiling and whistling a terrible tune as his eyes scanned the grounds in search of possible human subjects for medical experiments. His eyes would light up in evil excitement when he found sets of twins to continue his abominable medical practices. He was fascinated by identical twins and physical abnormalities, 2 different eye colors, dwarfs, cleft lips, similar to what he had studied during school. But his methods of study were horrifying. He would entice the subject with promises of better sleeping conditions and tastier food. He emphasized that he was temporarily saving them from the gas chambers and would even encourage the children to call him Uncle Mengele and share little candies with them. A former Auschwitz inmate doctor said of Mengele, he was capable of being so kind to children, to have them become fond of him, to bring them sugar, to think of small details in their daily lives, and to do things that we would genuinely admire. And then, next to that, the crematoria smoke. And these children, tomorrow or in a half hour, he is going to send them there. Well, that is where the anomaly lay. Little did they know that the food, shelter, and kindness Mengele showed was not an equal trade for the experiments he would do on them. The horrifying, merciless torture. When twins were brought to his lab, he would force them to undergo physical examinations, not making them run or checking their heart rate, but subjecting them to infection, amputations of healthy limbs, and dangerous blood transfusions. Mengele continued losing patients during his procedures, but he couldn't stop. He was engulfed in terrifying fascination with what he had learned with each cut and puncture into the skin. And every patient who survived the torment was killed by Mengele or one of his assistants to study post-mortem. On one occasion, Mengele injected chloroform into the hearts of 14 twins simultaneously. Some twins were sewn back together in the hopes of creating conjoined twins. He extracted the eyes of dead inmates, pinning them to the wall like badges of honor, and would pull teeth and take blood from prisoners with physical abnormalities to better understand their genetics. Even the other doctors at the camp found the task of human experimentation grotesque and shameful, but Mengele took it upon himself to conduct as many studies as possible. After only a few years in this position, Mengele had killed and destroyed the lives of thousands of inmates trapped in the Auschwitz concentration camp. He was transferred to the Gross-Rosen camp to continue his work. Little did he know that the war was about to end. Soldiers marched on Auschwitz, opening the gates and freeing all those prisoners trapped within its walls. Sighs of relief spread across the nation. Not far away was Mengele, hearing of the liberation and fleeing for fear of retaliation or imprisonment as a member of the Nazi Party. He snuck onto a train heading towards Czechoslovakia, disguised in an officer's uniform. But Josef didn't stay long for fear of being captured when he arrived. He planned to head west to avoid the Soviet armies, but was captured by the Americans in June of 1945. Mengele was among the most hated, horrifying creatures of World War II, but he was not treated as a war criminal upon his capture. He lacked one of the most common features in the Nazi Party, the tattoo of the SS blood group. So, Mengele was released by the Americans and was conferred fake papers. He found work as a farmhand near Rosenheim and eventually escaped Germany in 1949, settling in Buenos Aires under the name Helmut Greger in 1949. He worked the day away as a carpenter, paying for his lodgings in a local boarding house, before meeting a fellow Nazi sympathizer. Shortly after meeting, Mengele asked to stay with the man and moved into the neighborhood of like-minded individuals. His fears progressively melted away the longer he remained in Argentina. He left the carpentry trade and started work as a traveling salesman for his father's farm equipment company, Mengele & Sons. After a couple years of work for his father, he saved enough money to buy interest in a local carpentry company and rent his own house. One day, he received a copy of his birth certificate through the German embassy mail services and finally gained an Argentine residence permit with his real name. From then on, he would only be known by the name that so many feared during the war, Josef Mengele. When his papers came through, Josef fled Argentina and met with his son Rolf and his widowed sister-in-law Martha for a holiday in Switzerland. Together, they planned to permanently return to Argentina, where they could become some semblance of a family. They returned to Buenos Aires when the holiday ended, settling into a small home together. But the peaceful days were short-lived. In 1958, police found a woman bleeding out from a poorly executed abortion. Several doctors, including Mengele, were arrested for practicing medicine without a license. He sat in the holding cell awaiting news, terrified that his Nazi background would be discovered. He thought of his family and the life he'd built, still failing to feel regret for his life-destroying decisions. Only hours later, he was released without a charge. But the fears persisted. Simultaneously, the director of the Israeli intelligence agency, Iser Harel, had his sights set on capturing Mengele. Harel had been tracking Mengele's movements for years, the quick moves, the name changes, and the purchase of land. Once Adolf Eichmann was captured in Buenos Aires, he shared the address of a safe house for Nazi fugitives. Although surveillance of the home didn't prove Mengele had been in the home, mail that had previously arrived there had a new forwarding address. Harel was determined to find Mengele, but when he visited the last place Mengele had worked, he came up empty. It was his final lead, and he realized that he had to put the search on pause. And while Harel was running out of options, Mengele was running again. He discovered that West Germany was offering a reward for his arrest, releasing his photo and information on the agony he caused during the war. He knew he couldn't stay any longer. So, he was put in touch with Wolfgang Gerhard, a former Nazi supporter who helped Mengele cross into Brazil. He stayed with Gerhard until he could move in with another couple, bribing them with investments in their farm and managing day-to-day operations. But Mengele slipped up. The couple discovered who Josef Mengele was, and he panicked, wondering where he could run to next. But before he could even plot for his next move, Gerhard had convinced the farm owners that they could also be arrested for harboring a fugitive if they went to the police, so he stayed put. As time passed, he and the farm owners bought more land, and Mengele eventually moved into a bungalow in Sao Paulo, where he lived the rest of his days. His health had declined over time, with his constant running, and he had extremely high blood pressure, suffered multiple strokes, and had vertigo after a severe ear infection. On February 7, 1979, Josef Mengele was swimming in the ocean while visiting his friends when he took his last breath. His head felt fuzzy. He was dizzy and couldn't continue treading water. Ultimately, it was in his final moments that he suffered another stroke and drowned, sinking deeper and deeper towards the ocean floor. When they trudged his body out of the water, he was later buried in a small cemetery in Brazil under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. Josef Mengele was one of the most evil persons in World War II, and possibly ever. The torment and torture he conducted in the concentration camps instilled fear in all of those who were imprisoned there and altered their lives forever. His is a name spoken with only hate, fear, and true disgust. Thanks for watching Fear Frontier. If you would like to see more content like this, please see our latest video in the series, Evil Persons, Jack Gilbert Graham. Please like, subscribe, and comment below if you have any stories you want us to cover.